Thank you for joining us today in Jennifer Schaus and Associates complimentary webinar series. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today. This year on Fridays, we are covering the Procurement Playbook. We will take a deep dive into doing business with the federal agencies and departments with our panelists. On Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern, we will cover the FAR supplements or procurement regulations for the agencies and departments. And Fridays, we will cover the business and development and marketing aspect of the same agency and departments. The full schedule and the sign-up links and the recordings are on our website. We would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. The Virginia PTAC at GMU offers a free one-on-one counseling in firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTACs can offer. And a special thanks to our sponsor, the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect appropriate industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works with mission-specific programs for a variety of agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40 plus years, the FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and federal government. DASTN is an IT and cloud solutions provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. DASTN is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, and a certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AO Docs, and Authenticate. For more information about DASTN services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, email joe.alston or visit the DASTN website. Please join us at the Kennedy Center for a night of networking with over 200 federal contractors. Our quarterly event will take place on Monday, June 20th. Sponsorship opportunities are available. Federal agencies will be present and will be listed as they confirm. Please note that ticket prices rise on June 13th.
Good to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure, Krista, can you share your screen?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Archie Shamihan, and I'm the FedMine Senior Product Manager at GovSpend. Thank you, Jennifer Schwartz and company, for inviting us to be part of this Playbook series, which I hope has been very helpful to a lot of our companies and businesses in this space. So next slide. So a little bit about FedMine. We are a federal business market intelligence company that basically integrates the 18 federal data sets into one easy-to-use platform. The company was founded in 2004 by a federal government contractor, so it was truly based on the type of information he wished or he wanted government contractors to have. Today, we work with small and large government contractors. We also work with many federal agencies. And a few months ago, we got acquired by GovSpend, which is the largest provider of purchase orders and bids in the state, local, and education market. So today, our combined companies provide the best of the federal and the state and local intelligence that is out there. Next slide. So these are just some of our data sets that I just wanted to put out there so people know where I'm pulling all the information from. Next slide. And just a little bit about what I already spoke. So let's get into the program. For those who have seen some of my presentations, know that I'm always going to talk a little bit about what is the agency's mission or the focus. And this is where I personally end up learning a lot. But I think it's super important to know what an agency is doing, what their focus is specifically for the upcoming years, what their strategic plan is, because that ties into what they're going to need, what are they going to require, what are the new programs that they're going to be looking at, and what is the opportunity for us as a company to go in and work with them. So the Department of Interior plays a central role in how the United States stewards its public lands, increases environmental protections, pursues environmental justice, and honors our nation-to-nation relationship with the tribes. And for this year, their challenges that the department feels needs to be addressed include COVID-19, of course, the economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. And as you know, climate change is a recurring theme that we are seeing, and rightly so, my personal opinion, in a lot of our federal agencies' challenges and focus and budget. So let's talk a little bit about their focus. One of their focus is to accelerate the responsible development of the renewable energy on public lands and water. This includes investments in climate research, environmental innovations, and of course, to incentivize the rapid deployment of clean energy solutions. The second focus is also to strengthen the relationships with the sovereign tribal nations. It also includes honoring the federal trust responsibility to our tribal nations, and this really needs to be the cornerstone of the federal Indian policy. Making investments to support the administration's goals of creating millions of family supporting and union jobs. And this actually includes and establishing a new climate conservation corps initiative, and basically to help a new generation of workers for helping increase reforestation and carbon sequestration, protecting the biodiversity, and improving access to recreation, and again, addressing our changing climate. The next thing that is really important is working to conserve at least 30% of each of the lands and waters by the year 2030. And this is to be done by protecting our biodiversity, helping leverage natural climate solutions. And again, this relies on the support for our local, state, private, and tribally led nature conservation and restoration efforts. And then lastly is to centering equity and environmental justice. And this impacts multiple crises in the United States that are not evenly distributed in the society. Part of what they want to do is also conduct formal consultation with tribes in recognition of the US government's trust responsibilities. So this is just a quick overview of what the department does, what are the challenges, and what are their focus for the upcoming year and two. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what has the agency done. As we know, the agency consists of many departmental offices as also bureaus. We all know about the National Park Services and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, as also the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Education, all fall within the Department of Interior. Last year, the agency awarded more than $5 billion to almost 12,000 companies. Always, wherever you see the link to report, it's all hyperlinked, so you could actually go in more in detail and see what's out there. Next slide. Let's go further in and understand how is the agency awarding its contracts, and this is at the top level. In terms of your top companies, it's a pretty nice mix of companies and the type of work that they do, whether we are looking at Dovell Technologies, Booz Allen, CDM Constructors, ICF, as also Accenture. Also pay attention at how are the contracts being awarded. What is being awarded in terms of 8A or in terms of the Indian Small Business Economic Enterprise types of clients. Those are things that we want to look at. So pay attention to that. I would always advise that, hey, go in and put in your keywords and see how's an agency purchasing based on the type of work that you do. So those are things that we definitely want to keep in our mind. Next slide. Also go in and understand how is the agency procuring in terms of the NAICS codes, which are, of course, are broad categorizations, but also pay attention to the PSC codes that are being used, and delve in deeper into those PSC codes too, because I think many times, and we say it over and over again, that the PSC codes sometimes give a much better representation of the type of work that you do. Even though the RFPs do come out under the NAICS codes, pay attention to the PSC codes. So next slide. So let's now further go in and look at the small businesses and the contracts that are being awarded as small businesses. I have $2.8 billion. I think that's almost like little more than 50% of the contracts that are being awarded as small business contracts. And last year, we have more than 8,700 companies that actually won these contracts, which is, again, amazing to see an agency do such a good job of making sure that the small businesses are taken care of. In terms of the companies that are winning the contracts, we do see a pretty good mix of companies, with ERA Helicopters being the largest small business within Department of Interior for last year. So next slide. So let's delve in further to understand, what are the various NAICS codes that are being used for this. You could see construction, computer-related services, and the non-scheduled chartered passenger aircrafts are all some of the top NAICS codes that are being used. In terms of set-asides that are going, large amount going as small business set-asides. Next, I would say even the 8A sole source and 8A completed do account for a large percent of contracts being awarded under that socioeconomic category. But then we also see women-owned small business set-asides, which I'm always thrilled to see, as also Indian economic enterprise set-asides. So again, really nice to see this mix of set-asides, because again, it sort of tells us how the agency is purchasing, what it is focusing on, everything ties in. Next slide. So let's also further go in, with the pandemic. How has the agency, acquired contracts under the COVID National Interest Action Code, FY20, because that also affects our year-over-year spend, right? So FY20, we had $67 million that were awarded under the COVID NIA code. Actually, 78% of those contracts were awarded as small business contracts to 424 companies. In FY21, you can see that the spend did fall to $36 million that were awarded to 333 companies. And again, 72% of these contracts were small business contracts. In terms of looking at the bureau, when you are looking at the Interior or any of these larger agencies, it's always important to look at the bureaus, see where the spend is, but overlay it with your NAICS codes or your PSC codes or the categories or your keywords, right? Or a mixture of everything. But sort of just so that you're focusing on the right agencies and the bureaus underneath those agencies. So this is just a quick look at what's happening under the COVID NIA code. Let's get to the next slide, please, Krista. And then again, I'm always looking to see, is the agency awarding anything under the SBIRs and STTR programs? R&D is getting to be such an important part across all agencies. So it's very interesting to see how different agencies award different contracts under these programs. More than $32 million was awarded to 170 companies. and 98% of these awards were small business contracts. Again, always great to see that. Next slide. So you heard me talk about categories. I find it very interesting to start paying attention and looking at categories. Categories are based off GSA's category management. It's based off the PSC codes. And under each category, you have subcategories. I'm just looking at your top categories because this is really giving me a much better idea of how is an agency purchasing. Facilities, professional services, IT, top 3 categories at the interior and across federal government, actually. But now go in and pay attention on how is the agency purchasing these categories as small business and other than small business. Again, gives you a lot more information and allows you to drill in and get a better understanding. So I'm always going to talk about categories and category management because that sort of leads into strategic sourcing, and we always want to keep our eyes open for that. So let's get into the next slide because that takes me into how is an agency purchasing across the various IDIQs and GVACs that might be there. And in this case, we do see that they are purchasing of the CIO SP3 vehicles as also NASA SUP 5 and 8A stars. So again, a good mix of seeing what's happening. I'm sure going forward, we'll see a lot more happening on 8A stars 3. So this is where if you are an 8A and are on 8A stars 3, it always gets to be interesting to see the type of work that was done at an agency on an 8A stars 2 vehicle and what could be possibly expiring under that vehicle based on the type of work that you do. So keep that in mind as you do your market research. Next slide. So further, we talked about how's an agency purchasing its small business, what are the top categories, what are the top vehicles that are being used. Let's go in and talk a little bit about subcontracts, right? So the subcontract data comes from USA spending, which gets it from FSRS, and it's really dependent on what the prime or the sub sometimes will report. But in FY21, I have $438 million that were reported as subcontract awards by 82 prime contractors. Why is this important? If you are a small business trying to break into an agency or a relatively new agency, you might decide to go the subcontracting route, create relationships with those prime contractors, understand the subs that are winning the works with those primes. What are they winning the work for? What is the pricing? Gives you that understanding also. So I always say, have a look, put in keywords, and then see how that agency's purchase, what's the status of the subcontracts. In this case, you could see that, the computer-related NAICS codes very much account for a large portion of the subcontractors. But then, of course, we also see things like facility support services and R&D. So next slide. And then quick look at who are your top primes, who are your top subs. And again, all this data is out there, or you could use a provider, entirely up to you. But this is just to give you a guideline of the type of data that you want to look at and help basically create your strategies based off that. So next slide. That takes us into the opportunities, right? So what are opportunities? We hear it all the time. We discuss it all the time. So of course, opportunities, the new opportunities are truly based on the new initiatives that an agency is coming out with. It's dependent on the agency's need, and hence you want to read those budget documents and the funding. And then as you're reading the budget documents, of course, all the data that I've presented, it has been focused on contracts. You do want to pay attention to the grants data too, because some agencies might be wanting to do a lot more based off grants. So those are things that we want to keep in mind. Then the other thing that you want to also keep in mind, especially if you're in the services industry, when are the contracts expiring? Who has those contracts? Think ahead. Is that something that you can do? Do you want to work with that existing prime as a sub? Do you want to create a joint venture? If you're an 8A, you could even create expiring contract searches based on 8A expiration. All of that is information that's there to help you understand and be focused. Now, how do you get that information? Look at the budget, look at the program information that's out there for an agency. Pay attention to the pre-solicitations and the source of sought notices, because that's where you get that's how the agencies do their market research. So you want to keep an eye out on that. Create expiring contract searches. If you are on the various IDIQs, GVACs, PPAs, then look at the task orders that are expiring specifically on those vehicles. So there are many ways of doing it, but the idea is to use the data to create your own pipeline of opportunities that are out there. Agencies are also doing a great job of putting out and releasing forecasts. Pay attention to that, because that is all done to help you focus and create a pipeline of what work you want to go after. So next slide. So quick look at, let's also look at the Exhibit 53s. These are your major IT program initiatives that are out there. And right here, you could actually see how it's been funded. Wherever possible, you'll find the links to awarded contracts. But this is just looking at the Department of Interior. You obviously can do keyword searches and things like that, but I just wanted to show you what's out there. Next slide. The next slide goes a little bit more into understanding the Exhibit 300s, which tell you more detail about a program, tells you how the CIO is doing, things of that nature. So always look at both, especially if you're in the IT industry only. Next slide. So looking at contracts that are expiring, I have almost $3 billion in contracts that were awarded as other than small business that are expiring in the next 12 months. Obviously, if construction contracts might be expiring, those might not be being renewed or next year. However, this is where I would say if you're a facility support company or something like that, these new facilities are going to have requirements and you want to start exploring those too. But these are your top 10 prime contracts that are expiring. Next slide. In terms of the NAICS codes, engineering services, offices of lawyers, administrative services are all the top NAICS codes where the contracts are expiring. The place of performance can also give you an idea, especially when we are looking at agencies such as the Department of Interior with all the parks and natural resources that are across the country. So it's nice to pay attention to the place of performance too. Next slide. And then when I'm looking at small businesses, I have a little less than 3 billion awarded as small business that expire in the next 12 months. Again, similar concept, pay attention, see if there's a specific set aside that you could use that as you're creating your searches, things of that nature. Next slide. And here's a list of your top 10 expiring contracts that were set aside, that was small business, that are expiring in the next 12 months. So just wanted to, again, give you a quick look. You could, in this case, see there are a couple of them that are on GSA schedules or could be 8A stars too also. But let's get into the next slide. In terms of your NAICS codes, construction, computer-related services, very much top NAICS code, followed also by the non-scheduled chartered freight air transportation. Terms of place of performance, it's a little different than what we saw for the top 10 other than small business contracts. Virginia is very much there, but now you do see states such as Colorado, California, DC, Washington that are up here. in terms of the top place of performance. So next slide. Um, in terms of the new opportunities that are out there, I ran this, I think, on Monday, the 25th. Yes, and I just ran a search for pre-solicitations and sources sought, and these are your top 10 pre-solicitations. And the reason I'm showing you this is to let you know that do respond to these. They are always being released, and you definitely want to make sure that if this is something that you do, to respond to them. So next slide. So the FY 2023 budget proposal is out there. Have a look at it. It was very interesting, very detailed. It is proposing a $3 billion increase over FY 22. Some of the programs that I saw that I found interesting had a lot to do with climate, tribal climate, resilience. But it was interesting for me to see that there's more than $1.4 billion planned for reclamation programs and projects. We have $1.5 billion for the wildland fire management, more than $682 million for the land and water conservation fund programs. Again, it sort of ties in with that agency's focus areas that I went over a little bit in the beginning, which is why I'm sort of trying to, I sort of want to make sure that, we make that connection, because that's how we're going to plan our strategy as we want to go and enter a specific agency or deepen our relationship within an agency. Interesting for me, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that wants to review 16 plans to construct and operate commercial offshore wind energy facilities by 2025. So, next slide. Also interesting was, looking at the infrastructure operations, maintenance, renewal, and modernization needs, again, keeping in mind with what the agency's focus and mission is. This gets to be important, as also cyber security, cyber defense is huge, and the agency's funding for that is in the little less than 45 million. 1.4 billion for R&D, again, huge. 1.6 billion for Indian education programs, things that we might not necessarily think about, very well covered within an agency's budget. So I would highly recommend that as you're going through the data and you're planning your strategy, look into the budget and see how you could help an agency with the type of work that you do, so that you have, when you approach an agency, when you're talking to the small business officers, you've done your research and you know what you want to do and how you could help the agency. I think that makes a small business super successful when they're working with an agency. I have provided the link to the budget for FY23, or the proposed budget. I would highly recommend everyone to look at that. And then, again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And with that, Krista, I think my portion of the presentation is done.
Great, thank you so much, Archisha, and thank you for a great overview. We want to thank Andrea Brunsman from the Department of Interior's Bureau of Reclamation for joining us today. I'll mute myself now and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide. It's great to have you, Andrea. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So my name is Andrea Brunsman. I'm from one of the 11 bureaus under the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation. We are, probably not so well known in the East because we only exist in 17 states west of the Mississippi. So that is something a little special about us. And I know before I moved to California and before I worked for Reclamation, I definitely was not aware of them when I lived in Washington, D.C. So, looking at what was presented just now with some of those big California projects that are coming out, that's a lot of what the Bureau of Reclamation does with our canals and dams and water rights out in California. Next slide. Great. So here are just a couple of links to the DOI particular website, and then their small business office, the OSDW office, Office of Small and Disadvantaged Utilization Office, which will provide you some great information. Again, it is, since DOI is such a large department with a lot of sub-bureaus. Obviously, there is DOI department spending, but those 11 sub-bureaus are really quite important. You know, a lot of the, especially the infrastructure bill money that is coming out, hopefully sooner rather than later, a lot of that will actually be going to places like the Bureau of Reclamation, like I mentioned, with our dams and canals in the West, and how those can be improved or upgraded or just fixed in general. Next slide. So here is a link. So this is a link to the DOI, link to our forecast. DOI actually uses the GSA acquisition gateway to post the forecast, and that is DOI and all of its sub-agencies use that GSA acquisition gateway to post our forecasted items. In theory, we are supposed to have everything for the next fiscal year posted to the forecast by September 30th of the preceding fiscal year. So this year, everything for FY23 should be posted to the forecast by September 30th, FY22. So we do endeavor to do that. However, you know, things do come up throughout the year, you know, priorities change, requirements change. So, you know, keep an eye on that. I post to the forecast quite often for the California Great Basin region within the Department of Reclamation. And even when I'm looking for something or doing anything, preparing for another small business event, I actually just go ahead and I download all of DOI. And then when you download that information, you actually are able to see a little more. And you can then, you know, download it into an Excel file, and then you can, you know, filter as to what's important to you or what you're interested in. I know there was a discussion of product service code or NAICS code that is used. The things on the forecast, we do include a NAICS code with those. We also include a contracting point of contact and then a small business specialist point of contact. In this case, for Bureau of Reclamation, California Great Basin region, that is me. But you'll always, if you download that information, you will be able to see those names. Next slide. All right, so the SBA scorecard, just to see how we're doing. Small business is very much a focus for I'm sure the entire federal government, and for Department of Interior and the sub-bureaus especially. I would say probably I've had the honor of working for several other agencies within the federal government, and I would say that DOI does make small business a high priority. And as was shown earlier, often, you know, 50–60% of our awards over a fiscal year do go to small businesses. Next slide. Best practice, know your business inside and out. Yes, not only that, I would say when you are responding to the sources sought and pre-solicitation notice, as was mentioned earlier, yes, please do that. That is how we make a lot of decisions. We like to be able to say, hey, we had at least 2 small businesses or women-owned businesses or SDVOSBs or hub zones or what have you respond to our sources sought. And they responded in such a way that we could tell that they could do what we were looking for. So often our sources sought will say, here are the, you know, 6 items or 10 items or however many that we want you to respond to us with. Go down that list and actually respond to those items. Don't just send me a line card that you send to everybody. Actually respond with what we're requesting for, so that we can have our technical folks go ahead and take a look at that response and go, you know, based on this, do we think that they would be able to respond to a solicitation? That is a lot of the times, you know, again, as a small business specialist, what I require my people to do before I sign off on them not going to a small business set aside. So we really rely on those responses. Know your advantages as a small business. Many contracts are set aside for the small business and socioeconomic disadvantaged businesses. Yes, most definitely. And this points you over to the Small Business Administration Set Aside Procurement webpage. I would also say that SBA has a database of small businesses. Get listed in that database. That is yet another market research tool that the contracting community often uses. Doing, again, as a small business specialist, what I encourage my people to do is do a search in that database, in that small business database that SBA has. And when they're posting their sources, reach out to those people that they found in that database under that NAICS code or in that area, whatever the case may be. Reach out to them and specifically target them with a link to our sources or to whatever posting we have, saying, hey, please go check this out, see if it fits your organization, and respond to us. Again, just really trying to make sure we're getting the word out, especially to small businesses, of what we have going out there. Become familiar with the Department of Interior and our bureaus. Yes, this one I would say is also, it's one of those things. The number of times I, in the Bureau of Reclamation, have been told that I work for the Bureau of Land Management. That's great. BLM is another great organization under the Department of Interior, but that's not who I work for. And so that can be a little disheartening when you're talking to a business and they're not clear on what part of the Department of Interior that you work for. If they're not paying attention to that, what else are they going to pay attention to in my solicitation? Build positive relationships with government decision makers, attend outreach and networking events. Yes, again, we do on the DOI webpage. I know the headquarters OSDBU office does do a lot of work to try to consolidate all the different small business events that are going on throughout the Department of Interior and their sub-bureaus, and making sure, again, that you're attending those events, that you're making those connections. Oftentimes that will be with someone in contracting, whether that be someone like me, a small business specialist, a contracting officer, or contract specialist, and occasionally even a technical person. Any of those connections that you can make can be very, very helpful. Just again, I know I went to a small business event a couple of weeks ago. It was the first in-person event that I've been to since the pandemic started. And I was able to meet with 12 different small businesses, and they each provided me their line card, which is great. And I was able to direct the small businesses as to, various upcoming procurements that might have been only on the forecast, not yet on sam.gov or something like that. So again, that they could reach out to those points of contact and get more information. Same way, I then took their line cards back, and where I thought they fit, I sent them to those technical program offices and said, hey, here are some small businesses. Go ahead and look them over, become familiar with them, so that if we do see them come in on something, it's not the first time they're seeing a name. They've seen that name before. They have maybe a little other information, a little more information about them than what would be provided maybe in a response to a source's side. So that is a very good idea. Next slide, please. All right, and like I said, there are a couple of links to events. The link to events from the OSDBU page for DOI, which I said it does cover events throughout DOI and the sub-bureaus. There is the 2022 Reservation Economic Summit coming up towards the end of May in Las Vegas. And then next slide. And then my event that I have June 8th, it's another virtual event. It is based out of California, so we are on Pacific time out there. But we, just because you're not in the West Coast or on the West Coast or in those 17 states doesn't mean you can't do business with us. So if you'd like to attend this event, I would really appreciate it. There's a link there, and you will have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. But this event is, we're actually having our program offices present their 3 to 5 year plan to the small business community. Again, giving you that information of what we have upcoming, maybe not immediately, but what you should be on the lookout in the forecast on sam.gov. And then again, providing those points of contact both within the technical community and the contracting community so that you can reach out to them, ask questions. That I think is also a really big and important part. If you're seeing a sources, if you're seeing a solicitation, if you're seeing even anything on the forecast, Again, go to those points of contact that are listed. There will always be at least one point of contact listed, and reach out to them. Start asking questions if it's unclear. Reach out again if you're interested in doing business out here. See if you can maybe partner with someone out on the West Coast. Get in touch with the PTACs that are out here. My area is covered by about 4 different PTACs. So use all of those resources to get into contact with your federal agencies that you're looking to work with. And I think that's it for us.
Great, thank you so much, Andrea, for a great overview. We want to thank Priyanka Sharma from the Small Business Administration for also joining us today. Now we'll move on to an inside perspective from the Small Business Administration. Once again, thank you, Priyanka. I'll mute myself now and let me know when you're ready for the next slide. It's great to have you. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to give a quick disclaimer that we are not endorsing any product or service by our presence here today. Next slide. So I am with the Office of Advocacy at SBA, and if you go to the next slide. We were created by Congress in the 70s to be the regulatory watchdogs for small business. So we're actually an independent voice within the federal government, and we're the watchdogs of the Regulatory Flexibility Act, which is a statute requiring agencies to consider small entities when they write regulations. Next slide. So we have 3 main mission focuses. The first, as I mentioned, is regulatory. We oversee compliance with the Regulatory Flexibility Act, and it's a law that requires agencies to consider flexible approaches to their regulatory goals to minimize the impacts to small business. We also have a research mission, which is we issue products related to small business data and statistics. And finally, legislative, in that we monitor congressional legislation. Next slide. So this is just one of our statistics on small business. As you can see, 99.7% of firms with paid employees are considered small businesses, and so this is a hefty sector of our economy. Next slide. So as you know, it's not easy being a small business. And so, we really try to be the voice of small business in terms of unduly burdensome regulations, which can add complexity, paperwork, labeling requirements, product redesign. And so we really try to come in and be the voice for that. So next slide. So how do we do that? So we represent small businesses before Congress, the White House, the other federal agencies, and the judiciary. We have a team of 15 attorneys. I am one of those 15 attorneys who cover every agency within the federal government. My portfolio includes agriculture, energy, and natural resources. So I cover DOI, DOE, USDA, and NOAA. And each of our attorneys has a different portfolio, including all of the independent agencies. Next slide. So our role in rulemaking, as I mentioned, we ensure compliance with the RFA, but we also have interagency communications during the drafting of regulations. This could be when an agency decides they want to do a regulation, they may reach out to our office to get small business data or to get our input, or during what's called the OMB OIRA regulatory review process, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Next slide. So these are just a few examples of the research products that we put out for small business. We put out a fact sheet every year on what's new with small business, and we do various issue briefs on topics. We also solicit requests for proposals from small businesses and from other government agencies. So if you're ever interested in having us produce a fact sheet or a longer report, we do have requests for research proposals that go out each year, and you're welcome to submit an issue for that. Next slide. So here we have our small business profiles. This is one of our most popular products. We produce these both for the entire country as well as state level. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of our state level small business products. We do these both for the entire state and for each congressional district. And as you can see on this slide, we also do research on different types of small businesses, minority, women, and veteran-owned. We do business turnover, finance. And so if you're looking for any research products, please do reach out to us. Next slide. We also have nationwide outreach. We generally have 10 regional advocates who act as our eyes and ears on the ground. Right now, we only have one of those positions filled in Region 1, and we're hoping to fill the rest soon. But they are kind of the first line for getting in contact with our office. Next slide. Finally, we also engage in international trade issues, and we argue for special concerns for small businesses in those regulatory matters. By law, when a trade agreement's being negotiated, we have to convene an interagency working group and report to Congress on the small business economic impact of the agreement under negotiation. So one way that you can get involved in that process is by reaching out to our office and serving as a small business representative on those panels and helping us to provide detailed information that we can supply in our reports. So we're currently conducting outreach with Japan, the United Kingdom, and the EU to develop those reports. We published our first report for the USMCA agreement. Next slide. So this is just a side-by-side comparison of advocacy and SBA. As you can see, we have a little bit of similarity and overlap, but we do generally do different things. SBA helps support with assistance, loans, and counseling, whereas advocacy is a voice in rulemaking. The Ombudsman helps with unfair enforcement, whereas advocacy helps during the rulemaking process. We have our own Senate-confirmed chief counsel that's not involved in SBA litigation. They have their own litigation team. Again, we both have 10 regional advocates that do different have different missions and focuses. And so even though we do work in tandem with SBA, we have a very clear-cut set of mandates from Congress that we operate under. Next slide. So this slide is a side-by-side of the SBA Ombudsman and advocacy. And for those who don't know, there is a specific small business ombudsman. So if you ever feel as though there's unfair enforcement happening with a regulatory concern, including repetitive audits, excessive fines, investigations, threats, or retaliation, SBA does have an ombudsman who will open an investigation with that agency on your behalf. You can go to their website to fill out a form and they will initiate that investigation. Advocacy is also obviously happy to help you with that process, but we don't actually conduct those investigations. So, there's a little bit of difference in that we are independent versus the ombudsman's an impartial liaison, but they are under the SBA umbrella. And then finally, the SBA Ombudsman works with regional small business regulatory fairness boards, which are appointed positions, whereas advocacy works on the front end, dealing with unfair regulations when they're being proposed. Next slide. So this is a chart that's kind of busy, but it outlines the federal rulemaking process. And I think one good example that I can use here is that in 2020, the National Park Service put out a proposed rule to update some of their policies and procedures for their concessions contracts for how they deal with small businesses and concessions contracts rulemaking. And so that proposed rule came out in 2020. That went to OMB for review because it was deemed a significant rulemaking, which is that it has 100 million or more effect on the economy, or it has an adverse effect on the economy in a significant way. So during that review process, advocacy was able to comment on a deliberative draft review of that document before it was published in the Federal Register, and I was able to offer some concerns that I thought small businesses might have. And once that rule was published to the register, then a comment period was opened. And again, we have an opportunity to comment during that public comment period and write letters directly to the agency if we feel they haven't done a good enough job of analyzing that small business impact. And then during the final rule review process, which that rule is actually at OMB right now, so I'm not able to talk about, the contents of that rule, but I am able to review it and provide any additional comments or feedback that we have that we think affects small business. So that's one tangible way where you all could get involved in this rulemaking process, because those policies that are being implemented under that regulation could potentially directly affect you when you're dealing with bids with the National Park Service. So if we go to the next slide, this slide outlines ways that you can actually get involved in that process. So as I mentioned, during the proposed rule stage, OMB will review that before it's published in the register. Small entities can actually request what's called an Executive Order 12866 meeting with OMB directly to provide information on how that rule could affect them. You won't have an opportunity to see the rule, as I mentioned, because it's in a deliberative state, but you do have the opportunity to provide your comments that could help to inform OMB and the agency partners who review those rules. It'll help inform their review of it. And so if you go through this chart, we're now actually in an OMB review of the final draft rule, as I mentioned, for that concessions contracts rulemaking. And so you do have the opportunity right now to request 12866 meetings with OMB to provide comments and feedback. And obviously, since you can't see the final rule in its deliberative stage, you would use the proposed rule and form your comments around the proposed rule. But that is something that you can do right now, and an action you can take right now. If you were to go to reginfo.gov, you'd be able to sign up there for those meetings. And so as you can see from this chart, you have two opportunities to have meetings with OMB, but there's also a public comment period where you can file comments to the Federal Register during the public comment open window, and they're required to respond to those comments in their final rulemaking, which is also something that advocacy looks for during that deliberative review process. Next slide. So some tips for writing comments to the agencies. From our perspective, and things that have been successful are really to kind of provide as much data and detail as you can in those comments. Try to avoid overgeneralized statements. We appreciate when narratives are included, so telling us how long you've been in business, what type of small business you have. But really, agencies are concerned with the current cost, the change in cost after the rule, the agency's estimated costs versus your estimates of how the estimates will affect you, and then any other costs related to the rulemaking. So not just how it's going to impact your revenue, but time to read and implement the rule, any additional fees you have to pay, equipment you need to buy, hiring compliance or attorneys or other staff to read through and understand things, paperwork. All of these things should be included in your comments. And then finally, telling the agency what to do. So sometimes in these comment letters, we'll see, this is a really bad rule. It's going to put me out of business. Please don't finalize this rule at all. And in our experience, that's not going to happen, because the reason the agency is putting out a regulation is because there's some sort of problem or market failure that they're trying to address. And so generally what's more successful is if you can offer an alternative that would minimize the impact to your business. So for example, is there a longer compliance time to comply with this rule that you can offer, or a different timeline or requirement? Or are there things that the agency can do to make the rule easier to understand or clarify? So for example, with this concessions rulemaking, is there a guide that the agency can put out that would help a small business in this situation? And they could do that in tandem with the rulemaking. Or are there forms that are currently done on physical paper that they could take online? Or are there online forms that could be easier or shortened in some way? So providing those types of alternatives will help you to kind of help the agency see what they can do to make this less burdensome for small business without just getting away with doing away with it completely. Next slide. So with respect to final rules, Congress can actually review those, and if they disapprove, they can do away with them under the Congressional Review Act, and then the rules can also be challenged in court, and the RFA legal challenge can also be challenged in court. So our comment letters can be used as a basis for challenging those. Next slide. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds on the Reg Flex Act. I do just want to mention that, you know, it forces federal agencies to measure how much a new regulation will cost a small business, and they have to consider less costly alternatives, and those are requirements by the statute. This slide, as you can see, is old, and, you know, each year we do analyze our cost savings to small business. Most years it's actually upwards of $1 billion, including this year, that we're able to save in regulatory cost savings to small business. And one other requirement under this Reg Flex Act is that we produce an annual report to Congress about our success stories. And so that report for FY21 did just come out, if anyone's interested in seeing it. Next slide. So this really doesn't apply to doing business with DOI, but 3 agencies are required to convene a panel before they can propose a rule that has a significant impact on a small business. So, you know, to the extent that folks work with EPA, OSHA, and CFPB, please reach out to us if you're interested in serving on one of those panels. And again, that's another way to get involved in this rulemaking process and to have your voice heard. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, there's some amendments to the RFA that helps to strengthen it. We are required to train the agencies on RFA compliance on a regular basis. So we make our rounds to the various agencies to train them on how to do this. And we issue compliance guides to the agencies. And again, we issue an annual report to Congress. Next slide. So this, again, is an example of one of our reports. We just published our 2021 report, so this slide will need to be updated. But on average, it's upwards of, you know, over $1 billion in regulatory cost savings. Next slide. So ways that you can get involved with our work, you can contact us with your regulatory concerns. You can subscribe to our email listservs for updates. We publish regulatory alerts every time that there is a regulation that may have an impact on small business. So you can sign up by agency or issue area to get those regulatory alerts, and you'll get a short summary of the rulemaking, a link to the actual rule, as well as the contact information for the attorney working on that rule. We also host roundtables. Some of those are posted on a quarterly basis. Others are by regulation or issue area, so you can attend those roundtables. They're open to the public, and the purpose is always to solicit comments and feedback from small business on a rulemaking that we're working on. Finally, I did want to flag that advocacy commented to DOI during the open comment process for its agency equity action plan, and we asked that there be specific measures for small businesses in that equity action plan. And if folks are interested, DOI did publish their equity action plan recently, and advocacy was pleased to see that there were a lot of mentions of small businesses in that equity action plan. We actually just recently published a blog that has kind of a chart outlining some of those small business plans for how they're going to address that and make some of their processes more streamlined for small businesses, both on the procurement front as well as permits for special events, and as far as having clear instructions for how to partner with Interior for programming and funding. So I'm happy to share that information. And if you go to the next slide, my contact information is here, as well as our website. All of our attorneys have their direct phone numbers and emails listed on the website, so please do reach out to us. We're happy to take your call. We're happy to schedule roundtables and meetings on issues that are of importance to you. And I hope that, you know, this information was valuable. So thank you so much for having me. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. Just once again, please join us at the Kennedy Center for a night of networking with over 200 federal contractors. Our quarterly event will take place Monday, June 20th. Sponsorship opportunities are available. Federal agencies will be present and listed as they confirm. Please note that ticket prices increase on June 13th. Thank you to our great speakers and panelists, Archisha, Andrea, and Priyanka, and our sponsors, and to everyone who attended the presentation today. The recording and slides will be available by close of business Monday. We look forward to seeing you next week as we dig into the Department of Labor. The FAR supplement will be on Wednesday and Playbook Friday. Registration links are on our website. Thank you so much, everyone.